All right. So as you can see, I chose this particular picture for the beginning because the 12th house is connected to prisons, institutions and prisons. Initially, hey, Paula, welcome back. It's great to see you. And hey, Natalie. And so I thought that we would use this. Now, of course, this goes totally against where modern astrology is with the 12th house. And, you know, it's kind of like if you look at the picture that goes to the 8th house, it's all about this, you know, hand coming out of the grave. It's all about the occult, scary, fearful aspect of the 8th, which once again goes back to our traditional understanding. But so one of the main terms to think about for the 12th house is confinement, right? To being confined, more so than the 8th or the 4th. And we're going to talk about this connection between the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th, and prison and imprisonment, which is something we have looked at before. But what I want to look at first is the fact that this is the first cadent house that we're looking at, that we're working with so far. So far, all of the videos that I have done have been, the videos I've done on houses has been the 1st house, the 4th house, the 8th house, the 12th. I'm basically working my way through all of them, and none of those other houses are cadent. Wait, 1st house, 4th house, 8th house. Now we're doing 12th. 12th house is our first cadent house. And it's also the first house that has a title with the word daemon in it. And so we're going to look at that. And I just thought it'd be interesting to see some of how cadency was looked at and why this idea of cadency is important. So those of you who did the Benadi with me, who did the Benadi 146 considerations series with me, you know, we talked a lot about what he calls advancement, what Al-Kabizi calls advancement, and also what is called retreat. And for a planet to be in a position of advancement, it needs to be in either an angle or a succeeding house. Of course, the angles are 1, 4, 7, 10. The succeedings are 2, 5, 8, and 11. So it was basically seen that if a planet was especially in an angle, that its significations could advance, were advanced by the chart. Same thing with the succeeding house to a lesser extent. But if a planet was in a cadent house, then that house, and this is also true for Hellenistic astrology, for Ava as well, that house was seen to be weak, and the term that Al-Kabizi or that the Arabs use is retreat, right? So it's in retreat. So the planet's either advancing by being in an angle or succeeding house, or it's in retreat by being in a cadent house. And as you can see here, in determining the strength in any situation, a planet in a cadent house is considered weak. In discovering lost objects or missing persons, it's a long way off, right? So if somebody says, where are my keys? And a planet that represents the keys, the significator for the keys, is in the 1st house, then it's right at the door, or right where you usually enter, right? But if it's somewhere in a cadent house, it's going to be away from where it is, so more difficult to find. Likelihood of discovery, little hope of recovery. Like I said, more difficult to find. In timing, the cadent houses slow things down. In matters of price, they're low. In matters of health and illness, it suggests a lack of vitality and argues in favor of illness or death. Right now, I don't know specifically about that one, because I think about it. If you've got a really strong planet that rules the 6th house in an angle, that could be a very good signification that the illness is going to be very strong and very bad. Right. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with this last one, but of course it remains to be seen, and I haven't really looked at it. But once again, if we take this idea into account of advancement versus retreat, if the ruler of the 6th, which represents illness, is in the 1st house, which represents the body, not only is he in an angle where his significations can advance, but he's also in the 1st house representing the body, so he can afflict the body. So the 12th house is called the bad demon, and as I mentioned, this is our first cadent house. Oh, one thing I wanted to say about cadency. Now, the reason that cadency is considered to be difficult, or considered to be malefic, is because you have 2 types of motion. you have the planetary motion, and the planets move from Aries, from Aries to Pisces in the order of the signs, right? So let's say you've got a Jupiter in Scorpio on the ascendant. All right, so that Jupiter in Scorpio is moving towards Sagittarius, right? However, the other kind of movement is the celestial movement, or the prima movement, or the first movement, which is the celestial movement, which moves backwards, which moves counterclockwise. Oh, wait, clockwise. So the planets move counterclockwise, and the world or the universe moves clockwise. So as a result, that Jupiter that's in Scorpio, before you know it, Scorpio is going to be on the 12th house, and Jupiter is going to be in the second, right? So it looks like so instead of Jupiter moving forward, you've got the chart moving backwards. And so that's how, wait, is that true? If it's in the second? No, sorry about that. My fault. Sorry about that. Jupiter is moving backwards into the 12th. That's right. Sorry, thank you. Sorry about that. I will get a, matter of fact, maybe I should do it now, since we're looking at it. And I think a chart will make it easier to see. Okay, so look here, we've got this Venus right here at 12 degrees of Cancer, and right here we've got 18 degrees of Cancer rising. Now, all of these planets move, as I mentioned, in this counterclockwise direction in the order of the signs, right? However, the world itself, or the universe itself, moves this way, right? Before you know it, it's going to be 24 degrees of Cancer, and Venus is going to be very much in the 12th house. And so same thing, before you know it, it's going to be Leo rising, and then she's going to go up towards the 11th house. So when this gets into Leo rising, then Venus is going to be very much in the 12th. As it continues to move to Virgo rising, Venus moves into the 11th. And so with cadency, the idea of it being a difficult position is the fact that if you have an angle, everything is towards the forefront. If you have something in a succeeding house, then with the celestial movement, like this Rahu here, it's going to move into the first house, right? When Leo is rising, then Taurus should be on the midheaven, and this Ketu, rather, is going to be in the 10th house. So the 11th will become the 10th. That's one of the reasons that some authors even believed that the 11th house was better than the 10th, because with the 11th, you had the 10th to look forward to. And the 10th would then become the 9th house, right? So the 11th house still had somewhere to get to. Now, the same thing here. With cadency, it moves into a succeeding house. So it moves away from the angle. It doesn't move towards the angle, it moves away from the angle. So that's one of the main reasons why cadency was considered to be so malefic. And so I just wanted to kind of bring that out there, because this is kind of, what shall I say? It's kind of the foundation of most of the judgment around cadency. So once again, 3, 6, 9, and 12. And once again, as I've said quite often, Rob Hand, who is somebody that I worked with in the 90s, said that he didn't really believe in this whole issue of problems with cadency. That, or not, he didn't believe in it, but that as a result of his own research, that he didn't see that it necessarily bore out. I don't know that I necessarily believe that myself. I've been seeing, from what I've been seeing, it's been looking, so the 12th becomes the 11th. Isn't that good? It's only good when it becomes the 11th, Olivia. It isn't good while it's there, right? So when the 12th, it's basically because the 12th moves away from the angle, right? So here's the thing, the 11th becomes the 10th, so the 11th, the succeeding house moves to become an angle, which is great. But the 12th house becoming a succeeding is not quite as useful. I mean, it certainly is better, but it's not going to be as good as a succeeding house that then becomes whatever, and then also becomes an angle. And then also, based on where it is at the exact moment, if it's in a cadent house, then no, it's not considered necessarily good. And like I said, this is something that we all need to be looking at and deciding on what it is that we believe, or based on what it is that we observe. So Manilius, who I just mentioned a little while ago, he called this the temple of ill omen, misery, bane, and toil. And toil and labor are connected definitely to the 12th house. Hostile to future activity, doomed to climb. Now, hostile to future activity was considered by all to be all Caden houses, except maybe the ninth. But essentially, because of cadency, it was considered Caden things. Think about it this way. When we looked at Benadi and the considerations, one of the things that was an impediment for the moon, specifically an impediment for the moon, was if she was connected to planets that were cadent. If you remember, the very first impediment for any planet, the very first one, the three most impeding situations for a planet, as per Benadi, aside from the moon, were cadency, combustion, and retrogradation. So cadence, this is why the hostility to future activity. Bad luck, self-undoing, slaves, enmity, danger, infirmity, death, foreign country. All of those things I'm down with, especially self-undoing. We're going to be looking at this. We're going to be looking at prisons, but we're also going to be looking at self-undoing. And this is what I find to be one of the most useful ways to use the 12th house now. So for instance, Ava mentioned that she has a Jupiter in the 12th. Now, a Jupiter in the 12th can be too, what's the word I'm looking for? Too optimistic, or could expand on things too much, or could inflate things in such a way that they're always setting themselves up for disappointment, right? So Jupiter makes things larger, or they could make mountains out of molehills, right? Jupiter makes things larger, right? So when we see what looks like it should be a really good planet, right? Jupiter in the 12th, that should help the 12th? Not necessarily, because what happens instead is that the planet in the 12th, and of course the planet that rules the 12th, will represent the energy that contributes to your self-undoing. Slaves. Now the 6th and the 12th are both connected to slavery. It looks like the 12th more so even than the 12th even more so than, or rather the 6th even more so than the 12th. Enemies, enmity, danger, infirmity, death, foreign country. Now, because the 12th house is a place of exile, foreign countries. And so one of the things that we should think about is during this period, during this early period, in this early time period, it was considered a malefic situation if you lived away from your home, right? And think now, we live in a very globalized world, and as a result, I can go to India and I can get great Wi-Fi, and I can go to a McDonald's and I can blah blah blah. But if this were the 3rd century or the 4th century, every culture was really, really different. Wore different clothing, wore different types of food, ate different types of food, all kinds of, just everything completely different. And there was a lot more suspicion around foreign countries and foreign people. And as a result, it was definitely seen as a negative thing if you didn't live in the home that you were raised in, you didn't live in the country that you were raised in, or your home, your Heimat, or your Patria. So Formicus is 4th century. Enemies, slaves, defects, and illnesses, called Malus demon. Here we come, bad spirit. House of Saturn, debilitated and passive because it does not aspect the ascendant. That's the other reason. So one of the things that we saw with Benadi in the 146 considerations was that another major important impediment for a planet was that if it were in a cadent house, especially if that house did not aspect the ascendant. And of course, houses 6 and 12 do not. And so those two are considered the worst of the two houses. And of course, 6th house is called bad fortune, 12th house is called bad spirit. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we get into this, the bad demon part and bad spirit part. We'll talk about that in a second. So let's see, enemies, Alberuni, and so now we're in the 9th century. Enemies, misery, anxieties, prison, debt, fines, bail, fear, adversity, disease, cattle, harbors, slaves, servants, exile. So if we could come up with a planet that represents a lot of the things that we're looking at: misery, anxiety, debt, fines, bail, fear, adversity. It sounds a lot like Saturn, right? It's already called the house of Saturn by Firmicus, right? So we know what we're gonna look at it a little bit in a second, but we also know that the 12th house, this is the first house that we're looking at, which is a joy of a planet, in which a planet rejoices. And the planet that rejoices in the 12th house is Saturn. Secret enemies. So look at what's between the 9th and the 17th century, secret enemies have come up, right? So we see enmity. Oops. How the hell did that happen? We see enmity, right? If you look at that, enmity, and we see enemies. So Firmicus has enemies and slaves, defects and illnesses, enemies with Alberuni, but secret enemies for Lily. And the reason that Lily used secret enemy is because the 12th house, whatever's in the 12th house, is unseen or invisible. Basically, after the sun rises, it goes into a part of the sky where it's not actually visible. That's when it enters the 12th house, right? When the sun rises, it's on the cusp of the ascendant, yes? After it rises over the ascendant, it becomes a 12th house sun, and we don't really see it until maybe about an hour later or an hour and a half later, and then it starts to show up in the sky. It's a very similar kind of situation to what happens to planets that are in the 12th. Which is why it's a secret enemy, or it's a self-undoing. It's usually something that we don't have control over, that we aren't able to really, that we're not able to control without using consciousness. A friend of mine used to say, please add consciousness. And with the addition of consciousness, anything is possible. We'll see if that's the case. Secret enemies, witches, right? And a witch, because he looked at the 12th house for whether you were cursed or not, right? Because if somebody put a curse on you, that's a secret enemy. So witches that would put hexes or spells on you were also considered in the 12th. Sorrow, self-undoing. We're back with self-undoing. Where's the first time that we see that? Self-undoing. Do we see it with who? So, oh, there we go. So it's even as far back as what this classical period. So when he says others, when it's actually, this is Deborah Holding's book. So when Deborah says classical, others / classical, she means before the Persians got it in the 6th and 7th century. So self-undoing goes quite far back. Let's see, imprisonment. There we go with prisons, and we haven't really seen prison. Have we seen it before? So what we're going to go into it in detail. So imprisonment, great cattle such as horses, right? Because remember, the 6th house represented domesticated animals, and the 12th house represents large animals like cows, cattle, horses, things of that nature, oxen and elephants. And then the modern, okay, here we are, seclusion, service to others, charity, the unconscious, self-sacrifice, escapism, mysticism, spirituality. Also, people try to put psychic power in, like, being, psychic ability in here, intuition and psychic ability. So all of that kind of unseen, mysterious stuff that people deal with. Now, the 4, the 8, the 12 are called by modern astrology the water houses, of course, because they're using the zodiac alphabet, right? So 4 equals Cancer, 8 equals Scorpio, 12 equals Pisces. But what I'd like to actually think about is, well, the term that the Vedic astrologers use for the 4, 8, and 12 are the moksha houses. So there's always something to do with release and loss in those. But just something. But for me, I would like to consider all 4 of these secret houses, or houses of the hidden, or secret. So the 12th house is called the bad demon, and here's some information that I just kind of got probably from Wikipedia. And I went to a fantastic Zoom thing on the Orphic hymns. And if those of you who did my planetary magic thing, we talked about using the Orphic hymns, and this woman's name is Kristen Mathis. And she studied at Princeton and Yale or something like that. She's an historian, a translator of ancient Greek, and she went to a really fantastic thing about the Orphic hymns. And she talked about daemons and how the daemons are lesser divinities, or like what we would maybe call, what do they call them? Demigods or of sorts. So daemons are lesser divinities or spirits, often personifications of abstract concepts, being of the same natures as both mortals and deities, similar to ghosts, chthonic heroes, spirit guides, forces of natures, or the deities themselves. Now, someone like Hercules could be a daemon, right? Theseus. Think of some of these great heroes, Jason and the Argonauts. They could, like Jason, those people can be daemons, right? So a daemon is not specifically God, right? It's not specifically a deity, although it does say that it could be a deity, but it's not specifically a deity, right? Now, one of the things that I found really interesting about this, from my time in India, is that one of the things I noticed when I was going to a lot of the temples in India is that often I would have more fascinating supernatural experiences in temples of saints than I would have in temples of deities. So I would go to a Shiva temple or a Vishnu temple or whatever, and it'd be, a great experience, or maybe I'd get a little something on at the darshan. But when I would go to some saint's temple, almost always something strange and unexplainable or overwhelming. I think I've told you about the last time I was in Varanasi, and I was at the Charlanga Swami Mutt, and at a certain point, I was there for a month, so I was going almost every day. And at a certain point in my pilgrimage to this, every day when I went in and had darshan of the statue, it had a different look on its face. I went in one day and it had this look like it was angry. It was looking over my right shoulder and looking angry. I went in after I had been sick for 4 days and it looked happy to see me. I went in and I sang. I went in and I sang for it, and it gave this big smile. I mean, literally, I know it sounds crazy, and this wasn't the only place where stuff like this happened to me. But seriously, crazy stuff can happen, and especially, like I said, at these temples of the saints, which could be considered on some level a daemon. Considering, right, they're lesser divinities. It's not necessarily that, because they were divinity in corpore, incorporated in body, right? So something to think about. In the ancient Greek religion, daemon designates not a specific class or divine beings, but a particular mode of activity. It is an occult power that drives humans forward or acts against them. Now, this is really what we're talking about when we're looking at the concept of daemon astrologically. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is in Cornelius Agrippa, and those of you probably know about Cornelius Agrippa, who's written the 4 books on occult philosophy. He actually gives a technique for finding the good daemon, right? So the good daemon is your 11th house, right? So he has a technique for how you would go about to find the correct name of the angel who is your good demon. And so this perfectly encapsulates an occult power that drives humans forward or acts against them. And so of course the bad demon acts against them. And so if you think about self-undoing as an expression of bad demons, self-undoing is what acts against us. And so there we are. Since daemon is the veiled countenance of divine activity, every deity can act as a demon. So in this particular case, he's saying every deity can act as a demon, even though before it's saying lesser divinities or spirits, right? So it's either way. But just keep that in mind as far as that's concerned. And certainly, if you've got a planet in the house, then that planet becomes, automatically becomes something of a significator. But also, obviously, the planet that rules it becomes a significator. So if there's a planet in there, that becomes kind of your bad demon. But of course, so does the ruler of the 12th house as well. This is from Ptolemy. So this is our 2nd century source. Called the house of evil demon because it injures the emanation from the stars in it to the earth, and is also declining. And the decline was a term they used for cadency. And the thick, misty exhalations from the moistures of the earth create such turbidity, as it were obscurity, that the stars do not appear in either their true colors or magnitude. So once again, we have this idea of obscurity and things that are hidden. And remember, when the term occult is used, it really means hidden. it doesn't necessarily mean supernatural. It means something that can't be seen, right? Because the 8th house and the genitals are occulted, right? The genitals are occulted. It's because they're hidden. We don't want to see them, so we always cover them. So whatever is covered is occulted or occultated. If the malefics, okay, so here's Valens, and he's being a little bit more specific about specific placements, but within it we get kind of an idea. So if the malefics happen to be in this place, they will cause great wounds and traumas, especially if they are in their proper face. If the lot of fortune is present in this place and some star rules it, there will be no help, not even during transits. Now, I don't necessarily believe that one. They have become enemies from the beginning, from the moment of birth. In the same way, benefics found in this place will not bestow their benefits, right? So there we go with Ava, right? Talking about her Jupiter. So some of you who weren't here, she was talking about how she has Jupiter in the 12th and how that's supposed to be a good thing based on modern astrology. But whenever she's come to a perfection of the 12th house, it hasn't necessarily worked out that way. So there we have a great example of that. Whenever these 3 stars fall in the sign, the ruler of the ascendant, the ruler of the part of fortune, and the ruler of the part of spirit, right? So the lot of daemon is spirit. They make men unfortunate and disgrace those lacking their daily bread. So that makes sense, right? Because the ascendant is obviously the body, but remember, we've also talked about how the ascendant is connected to personal happiness and to where it is that we want to put our focus. The lot of fortune became known as the primary indicator for substance, and also I call it the path to fortune. That's one of the things that we've looked at. And so having that there, path to fortune and to professional life. Which lot? The lot of fortune and of daemon. So the ascendant, the lot of fortune, and the lot of daemon, which is the lot of spirit. And lot of spirit is called future worm, future things, hidden things. And so that was also very much connected to, and remember, the lot of fortune is the lot of the moon, or the ascendant of the moon, and the lot of spirit is the lot of the sun. And of course, the sun is connected to kingdom and to prominence, etc. So all of those things, when they put themselves into the 12th, or when they find themselves in the 12th, it can be something that isn't necessarily good for them. Okay, and many will hold out their hands for alms, right? Because remember, Saturn represents beggars and poverty. And so remember that the 12th house is the house of Saturn, right, as per Manilius, but it's also the joy of Saturn. And this is what Manilius has to say about it. The temple that is immediately above the horoscope and is the next but one to heaven's zenith is a temple of ill omen, hostile to future activity. There it is again. And all too fruitful of bane, nor that alone, but like unto it will prove the abode with which confronting star shines from the Occident and adjacent to it. And so that this temple should not outdo the former. Each alike moves dejected from a cardinal point with the spectacle of ruin before its eyes. There we go. So remember what we were just talking about, the primary motion or the celestial motion, and how it will move the 12th house to the 5th, and it will move the 1st house to the 12th, right? So that's what he's talking about here. Each alike moves dejected from a cardinal point, thus the 1st house, with the spectacle of ruin before its eyes. So the 1st house becomes the 12th, right? The 7th house becomes the 6th. The 10th house becomes the 9th. The 4th house becomes the 3rd, as per the celestial or primary motion. And so that's what he's talking about. Each shall be a portal of toil. In one you are doomed to decline, in other to fall. Now, what I'd like to see about that one is, I think the 12th house being above the horizon more than likely represents fall, and the 6th house being below the horizon more than likely represents climb. Okay, that's my, I'm not exactly sure. And I'll look that up myself and come back to you all. Okay, so now we've left the Hellenistic period and we've moved into the medieval Islamic period. And so now we can see how it's kind of moved, house of enemies and labor and sorrow. So labor and sorrow, that belongs to Saturn. So it seems obviously so, well, enemies is usually, now one of the things that I've been noticing is that really the 6th house is the house, in Vedic astrology, the 6th house is the house of enemies. In a lot of the older Western astrology, the older Hellenistic time. And actually, Ava, if you're here, go ahead and write into the chat and see if and tell me if your teacher believes the sixth house represents enemies, or if he puts that with the 12th, because a lot of the stuff that I've seen Hellenistically does put enemies in the sixth, primarily in the sixth. But once again, they make this weird distinction, right? Now, here's the thing. The 12th house is above the horizon. So it being secret enemies, that's interesting, right? But we know it's secret. We know that the concept of secrecy is around the fact that things in the 12th house are hidden from view. So that's really, I think, where that comes from, because it would, on some level, make more sense for the sixth house to be where the secret enemies does. Yes, the sixth house is the joy of Mars, right? And so, of course, why would it be the joy of Mars? Mars thrives on battle, right? Mars thrives on enmity. So that makes perfect sense. And so there again, I think enemies really belong more, right? Enemies have animosity towards you, right? And so the opposite of animosity is harmony. So harmony is Venus, animosity would be Mars. So definitely there's this Martian aspect to the concept of enemies. Let's see, and this is what I find really interesting. It signifies what will happen to mothers in their conception in terms of good or bad. So Ava, if you've had children, I'm wondering if you've had a good pregnancy, right? With Jupiter in the 12th, that might show the positive aspect of it, or your good conception or labor or pregnancy at that particular time. And of course, what do we call when you have a child? We call it labor, right? So indeed, so it could also, so I didn't even ever think about that, right? So happen to mothers in their conception, but also it could be what kind of labor you go through. So if anybody here has children, Paula here has children, it might be interesting to look at the 12th house. Paula, when we get to it, when we get to looking at y'all's charts, 2 easy births, she said. Oh, and Ava, oh yes. Wow, Ava, okay, fantastic. 2 easy births, says Ava, and she's got Jupiter in the 12th. Is that right? Fabulous. So interesting. So Paula, we're going to be looking at you and yours if you're still with us when we get to the charts.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so and once again we've got this Andarzagar, easy birth, Saturn. Oh wait, Diana had an easy birth and she has Saturn in the 12th. Is it in its own sign, or is it in its own sign, or exaltation? And was it a long birth? Was it easy but long, but took a long time, or delayed, or anything like that? Diana?
Yeah, it's in Aquarius, so it's in its own sign, and it was very quick.
Interesting. This is something to look at. Oh my God! I mean, literally, I was just looking at labor and conception and all that. I'm like, wait a minute. When a woman has birth, that's called labor. So maybe something to look at, everybody. Okay, and so.
Can I add one thing to that?
Absolutely, please do.
So that was actually my 3rd pregnancy. I had 2 abortions before that, though.
Ah, that's interesting too. Okay, all right. So there's the delay in a viable pregnancy that can be brought to term. So that
and I had.
Yep, go ahead, Paula.
And I had preterm labor. I had preterm labor and had to be on bed rest with the 2nd pregnancy, and the 1st one took me a while before I became pregnant.
And tell me something. Do you have anything in the 12th house, or?
Let's see. 12th house. I see. I have 12th house. Sorry.
Well, you know what?
No, I don't.
You know
I
what?
don't see anything here.
Bookmark it, and we'll come back. Like I said, when we get to the charts, we'll look at this, and then I'll do we'll do a little thing around it. All right. Right now, so those of you who haven't been with me, this is one of the fascinating things about this medieval period, is that they use the triplicity rules. And I'm sure, Ava, you having learned Hellenistic, you are probably aware of the triplicities. So the triplicities are just another term for element. And there are 3 planets that rule each one, each trigon or whatever. And as a result, that's what he's talking about. So let's say, for instance, if Aries is on the cusp of the 12th, which it may be for Eva, then that means, and it's a daytime chart, that means that the sun would be the ruler of the 1st triplicity and would represent enemies. The Jupiter would be the ruler of the 2nd and would represent labor. or labors. So maybe we could even look at labor, at the second triplicity for what happens with a woman when she goes through labor. But the third signifies beast. So the third one would be Saturn, representing things like horses or elephants or cattle or things of that nature, and flock animals. All right, so that's something that we've definitely also been looking at. So now we move into Benadi, and as I always mention when I talk about Benadi, Benadi is really the ultimate he was a working astrologer. Unlike Ptolemy, he was a working astrologer. So he was working as an astrologer, and he was working with charts, etc. So he's working with the practical. Like Ptolemy, he's also one of the main compilers of the knowledge that precedes him. And so almost every time we read Benadi, he says, oh, so-and-so says this. Oh, and so says this. And so says this. I myself say this almost every time. And so that's what's so valuable about him is how he compiles all of this material from the Islamic period, and then he himself interjects with his own observations and his own usage. Which is also the reason that I think Vettius Valens is so useful, because unlike Ptolemy, Valens was a working astrologer, and so we have examples. We've got chart examples. We've got delineations in Valens, similar thing to Benadi. So Ad-Dawlah signifies hidden enemies and deceivers and the envious. And it's so false friends, that kind of thing, signifies cows, horses, donkeys, camels, right? The big animals, all animals which are ridden and the like, okay, makes perfect sense. And it signifies grief, sorrow, wailings, weepings, lamentations, whisperings, and the like. So that's the second time we've seen the term whisperings, right? So, and usually when people are whispering, they don't want you to know what they're saying, right? Someone's whispering about you, or they're whispers or rumors or whatever, right? And once again, we're going to get to that in a second. And Saul said that it signifies cunning and evil thoughts. And Al-Kabizi said, right, who we read already, labors and bad characters, and it signifies the end of life and what happens to women from conception, which we were just looking at. And then he talks about Al-Andaragar and what happens when we use the three triplicity rulers. Now, mind you, this use of the triplicity rulers really comes from Dorotheus in the Hellenistic period. He was doing this. They may have changed some of the significations, but Dorotheus is really the first one to be using that. And certain others say that all lords of the triplicity of the 12th and its domicile lords signify prisons and the incarcerated. Okay, so this is where I wanted to bring. Now, I brought this up when we looked at the 12th house in the traditional astrology course, when we looked at the 8th house in the 8th house video. We talked about this, and so I'm just going to bring it up one more time. What he basically believes that both the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th represent imprisonment. And others said that the 8th house signifies the incarcerated, and others said that the 4th signifies prisons, okay? But one did not contradict the other because the 4th house signifies prison since it signifies capture. Oh, no problem. Is it working for you now, Layla? So Layla's been kind of coming in and out because she's having problems with the audio. Indeed, the 8th signifies, so capture. I think that's really fascinating. We haven't looked at lots of examples of incarceration within the 12th. Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. So look and see what he's talking about. Indeed, 8 signifies prison because it signifies the act of incarceration. And so when we talked about the 8th house, we actually talked about how the 8th house, especially when we're turning the monster on ourselves, right? That the 8th house represents the area in which, or what we do to incarcerate ourselves, to put ourselves into our own self-made prison of the 12th. Right? So we incarcerate, there may be some issue by which we incarcerate ourselves. And then we end up responding to it, or responding behaviorally to this thing. And that thing usually ends up being or the way that we end up responding to it ends up not necessarily being useful to us. It becomes a form of self-undoing. So I think that's the difference. So not necessarily, and so wait a second, well, we're gonna look, I've got a bunch of charts of people who've been in jail. And so we're going to look to see if we can find any difference between the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th. Christopher just said, oh, there's many examples of incarceration at 12. But are there? I mean, are there? Are there? Or have we just not looked closely enough? Well, moon in the 12th, but I mean, you know, but we've got, I've got all kinds of people who've been in jail, and none of them has moon in the 12th. So that's going to be interesting to see. But all the sages agree in this, that the 4th house signifies prison because it is the principle of prison and incarceration, since if there is no capture and act of capturing, there is no incarceration or act of incarcerating, and there is no capture and act of capturing and incarceration and act of incarcerating, there is no place of incarceration, nor in which some incarcerated person stays fast. So I think that's a good distinction in response to you, Christopher, is that there's got to be capture and incarceration before we find ourselves in jail. And so let's see if we can see that. Oh, well, welcome, Monica. Well, first of all, Monica, is this your first time with us? If it's your first
Yes,
time,
yes, it is.
Okay, and is
Yes.
it your first time with dealing with traditional astrology at all?
Yes.
Ah, well, that's why. And where did you come in just a little bit late?
Probably about like 15 minutes.
Yeah,
About 15 minutes late.
that might be why it's going over your head. What I would suggest is I'm going to put this up on my YouTube channel, and what I would suggest is go back and watch that first 15 minutes, or obviously feel free to ask any questions to clarify things. You can either just blurt it out, or you can write it in the chat. If you're, what are you feeling? What are you feeling confused about here now?
Well, I mean, I know I had my astrology chart done, and my gosh, some of those things are head on. But this right here, like I said, probably just because I came in late, so I'll make sure I watch it on the YouTube. But like this right here, what you're speaking of in regards to the incarceration and the houses and all of that good stuff.
Okay, so how much? So obviously that there are houses, there are planets, right?
Yes.
Okay, and each different house is a different area of life. That's what we're kind of looking at right now, right? So we're looking at the area of life signified by the 12th house. And what basically this particular author is saying is, hey, the 12th house represents prison, but it's not the only one, right? And it's not the cause of imprisonment. What's the cause of, well, the cause of imprisonment is crime, obviously, right? But in order to be imprisoned, you have to be captured. You have to be caught. Anybody been watching Lupin, which is all about Arsène Lupin? It's like a modernization of Arsène Lupin. And yeah, just keep at it. Keep at it with me. But I'm happy to kind of continue to break it down. But Arsène Lupin is a famous literary figure in France, and he's called the gentleman. He's called the gentleman thief. And one of the things about him is he can escape from anything. He can leave no trace. Nobody knows what he looks like. He's kind of this genius of crime. And so for Lupin to go to jail, you have to catch him first. And so that would be the 4th house, catching Lupin. And then once he's captured, then you have to sentence him. And that would be the 8th house, is what Benadi is saying. And then once you're sentenced, then you're sent to a particular place to go to jail. And that would be the 12th house. And somebody asked me about nor the place where he holds fast, nor the, oh, here it is. There is no place of incarceration, nor in which some incarcerated person stays fast is held. Stays fast, stays. Stays fast means you stay in one place. So nor is there a prison in which they are held, is what Benadi means by this. And this house is said to belong to the act of those incarcerated on account of the fact that it falls from the eastern line, right? So it moves away from the ascendant, and because it is in the joy of Saturn. So Monica may not know that planets rejoice in certain houses. And let's talk, this is a good place to talk about this. So planets rejoice in certain houses. So Mercury rejoices in the first house. The moon rejoices in the third. Venus rejoices in the fifth. Mars rejoices in the sixth. Sun rejoices in the ninth. Jupiter rejoices in the 11th. And Saturn rejoices in the 12th. Now, the thing about the joys is the joys of a planet are that because that house or the significations of that house reflect the significations of the planet who rejoices in it, regardless of the sign. Monica, one of the things that we, in earlier astrology, that we really deal with quite a bit is essential dignity, or how a planet is strengthened based on the sign that it is in. And all planets, except for the sun and moon, own two signs. They're called their domiciles and are exalted in one sign. So there are three signs in which a planet is really, really strong. And so when a planet is strong, its significations can come through in a similar way that when a planet is in an angle. So I don't know if you were there when we talked about advancement versus retreat, but when a planet is in an angle like the first house, fourth house, seventh, or 10th, then that planet is able, its significations are able to advance forward. And so same thing, when a planet is in its own sign or in its exaltation, its significations can advance forward. It can express its significations perfectly. When a planet is in the signs that are opposite to its own sign. So for instance, Saturn, since we're looking at Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius. The opposite of those signs are Cancer and Leo. When Saturn's in the opposite, then he can't act like himself. He can't act according to his nature. If Saturn is in the sign of Jupiter, he's going to act like Jupiter. He's not going to act like himself. He won't be able to necessarily do his significations the way that he likes to. However, if Saturn is in the 12th house, he gets to do them because the 12th house also holds his significations. And this is the same thing for instance, Venus, whose joy is the 5th house. The 5th house is the house of pleasure, amusement, sexual enjoyment, sensual pleasure. Children, how do you get children? Sexual pleasure, right? So Venus, it doesn't matter what sign she's in if she's in the 5th. Because she's in her joy, she's going to get her significations from the house. Same thing here. So this is why he's saying, because it's the joy of Saturn who rejoices in wailing and lamentation and the like. So no matter where Saturn is, no matter what sign rather Saturn is in, when he's in the 12th house, the house is going to give him his significations and he's going to feel at home. We haven't really looked at Johannes Schöner, but he was he was born in the late 15th century. He is a 16th century German astrologer and priest, and and he is matter of fact, he is a contemporary of Martin Luther. And he has two fantastic books. One is called Opus Astrologium, and the other is a book on nativities that he did. And this is a main thing on all of it, right? Main thing on all of these things. And here's what on all of the houses. And so we're coming to the 12th, and just to kind of show house, which is named the evil demon, which we've already talked about, holds a signification of hardship, sadness, enemies, prison, servants, large animal. Now, servants often meant slaves, but the slaves often were also in the 6th. So we can see this connection between the 6th and 12th, and generally like 5th and 11th, 2nd and 8th, 6th and 12, 1 and 7. There's always going to be a little bit of commonality between those houses. And let's see, it rules the feet with gout, and Venus is Venus is the co-significatrix, because Venus is exalted in Pisces, which is the sign of the 12, which is the zodiac alphabet for the 12. Isn't that interesting? We're going to look at that in a second, because now we see, now I understand why what I saw earlier was there. So remember this, Venus is co-significatrix. Now, here's another reason Venus is the co-significatrix of the 12. In Vedic astrology, the 12th house is called the house of bed pleasures. So Venus obviously makes a lot of sense in the 12th house because that's where the bed pleasures happen. So just thought that's an interesting thing, but that's very interesting. Venus is co-significatrix. And now we come to Lily, who's our most recent author that we'll be working with. Monica, I don't go any further than the 17th century. Yeah, Christopher.
I was just wondering, where did you get that image from in the previous slide?
From the Schöner. It's from the Schöner Opus Astrologicum.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And so now we kind of come to the really, ultimately, I'd love to do it this way because we get to see we've gone from the 2nd century and now we're here 1500 years later to the 17th. And we get to see kind of throughout this 1500 years how it's developed and to what extent it's actually really quite consistent. Last week when we did the sun, we saw that over that 1500 years, very little had changed as far as the significations of the sun were concerned. And that most of these significations for the sun didn't start to change until the 19th century and the beginning of modern astrology. Private enemies, witches, and great cattle, which you talked about, sorrow, tribulation, imprisonment, all manner of affliction and self-undoing, right? So I think we've got, it has con-significators, Pisces and Venus. Saturn does joy, for naturally Saturn is the author of mischief, and it ruleth a man's body, the feet, right? Color, remember that the 2nd house and the 12th house are both green. It's a cadent house, feminine, and vulgarly sometimes called cataphora, right? So that's interesting. So we had epicataphora, which was falling into the underworld. So I wonder what cataphora means. Would somebody look that up for me? I wonder how that's different, because anaphora is coming out of the underworld, epicataphora is going down in. So I wonder what cataphora itself means, or maybe cataphora means in the underworld itself, right? Because epi means around, doesn't it? Or para means around. Maybe epi means, yeah. If someone would look that up for me, that'd be great. Something about the liminal space where one is in and out of the world, I think. And that's where the gods play, the cataphora. Interesting. Well, we're going to look that one up. This is the true character of the several houses, according to the Ptolemaic doctrine and the experience I myself have had for some years. I must confess the Arabians have made several other divisions of the houses, but I could never in my practice find any variety in them. Wherefore I say nothing of them. Isn't that fascinating? All right, so that's very interesting. Because also remember, almost everybody that I use was a working astrologer. Lily was one of the most prolific working astrologers of the 17th century in England. I thought what I would do something that I didn't do with the 4th and the 8th, which was look at the Arabic parts of the 12th house, and then also look at the compound on mutant. And that, Monica, once again, that might be a little bit, above the pay grade as far as, but now you see there's so much to know, right? So obviously the most important aspects of, or parts as far as Schöner is concerned. First of all, let me tell you, Monica, if she doesn't know what the Arabic parts are, they're actually the Egyptian lots. And basically an Arabic part is created by using 2 planets that represent, or a planet and a cusp that represents the same thing. So for instance, this is a good example. For the part of enemy, we use the Lord of the 12th and the degree of the 12th cusp, right? So those are the 2 significators. And then the distance that's between those 2 is projected from the ascendant. And I'll give an example. We'll look at examples of these. So day or night from the Lord of the 12th to the degree of the 12th cusp. Okay, so we don't switch it. We don't switch it for night. But for the part of contention and jealousy, it's taken by day from Mars to the sun, and from night from the sun to Mars. And once again, Monica, we'll give examples of this when we get to the charts. So remember, Schöner is after Benadi. I should have put Benadi first. Schöner is after Benadi, and he only had 2, but Benadi has 3. So he obviously uses, looks like he uses both of them. So the first one is taken by day and night from Saturn to, but look, he does it different. Pars Inimicorum, day and night from Saturn to Mars. In this one, it was Mars to Sun, Mars, this is completely different. Sorry about that. part of contention and jealousy. You're going to find this is not in Benadi. So this might be one that was created after Benadi or even by Schirner himself. By day from Mars to Sun, by night from Sun to Mars, okay? But here, what he says is day and night from Saturn to Mars. And then the second one is the first one that Schirner himself mentioned, which is the Lord of the 12th to the cusp of the 12th, by day or night. And the third one is called the part of labor and affliction. And it is taken by day or night from the fortune, from the part of spirit to the part of fortune. Oh, wait, why does it say that? It is taken by day or night and by night by the reverse, huh? I think there's a typo. So it looks like it's taken by day from spirit to fortune and by night from fortune to spirit, okay? And this part is similar to the part Mercury, which would be correct. It is a mistake. It should be by day from spirit to fortune and night from fortune to spirit. If it is blah, blah, blah. So this is when he talks about that. And then the very last thing I thought I would do is we would look at compound mutants. And this is another thing, Monica, sorry, that we're getting a little, see, most of the people that have been with me since we did the traditional astrology course almost a year ago, about 6 months ago, we finished it. And so we learned how to do our mutants. We learned what an mutant is. We learned how to do our mutants. But so what would happen? Basically, a mutant means victor or winner. And what you would do is you would collect, for instance, the cusp of the 12th house, the planet that rules it. Now we see why Venus is here. And notice that this person was like, Venus, fuck that shit. And they crossed it out. But we now know that Venus is the co-ruler or the co-significator for the 12th. And so that's why they put the Venus in. Oops, what the fuck did I just do? What did I just do? Sorry. Now let's see what you were. I'm just coming up to the. But hold on a second here. Sorry. Oh fuck! Really? Oh, I've got to stop it for a second. Sorry. Anyway. Okay. So what they would have done is they would have collected all of these together, and they would have added. They would have kind of come up with all. So remember when we mentioned this concept of essential dignity. And essential dignities, what we talked about, for instance, when Venus is in Libra, she's in the sign of her domicile and is in an essential dignity. The medievalists, they created a scoring system to see who would be the strongest planet in that particular place. And so they ended up expanding that to create compounds. So you can say, okay, the ruler of the 12th, who's the strongest in the cusp of the 12th? Is it the planet that rules the 12th, or is it some other planet? But they could also say, who's the strongest planet in all of these positions? And that planet is going to be what we call a compound mutant or victor. And so for those of you who are able to follow what we're talking about, you would use the cusp of the 12th, its lord. You can use Venus if you want. Part of enemies, its lord, Saturn, and the first triplicity of the Lord of the 12th, which represents enemies, right? So I think that's my last one. It is. Good. So what I want to do first is I want to come to somebody who's been arrested. And just for Chris's sake, I thought I would just quickly go through these 5 charts so that you can see. Here's Mae West, who spent quite a bit of time in jail. Not a long time in jail, but she went to jail quite often because of the type of material that she put on Broadway. Here's Frank Sinatra, who went to jail for seducing a minor. No moon in the 12th. Here's Bernie Madoff, who went to jail for defrauding wealthy people of their money. No moon in the 12th. Here's Billie Holiday, who spent much of her young life in reform school. There's moon in the 12th. And then also went to jail in her late 20s as a result of her drug use. Here's Adolf Hitler, who wrote Mein Kampf in jail. No moon in the 12th. Here's Heidi Fleiss, the DC Madam. No moon in the 12th. All right, so once again, just wanted to kind of, interesting that someone brought up this moon in the 12th thing, but we really didn't see it. So what I want to look at, yeah, sure, Christopher.
Really quick, one thing I was going to say is it might be worthwhile looking up the charts of people who are sort of permanently in prison or really, really long prison sentences, things like that. Like,
you mean criminals? You mean real? You mean like lifelong criminals or something like that? And maybe we'll do that. Well,
I mean,
let's do that for a second. Let's actually
the example that I kind of thought.
Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I was thinking that the two examples I had off the top of my head are, I know like Ross Ulbricht, who founded the Silk Road. You know, he got 2 life sentences. He's got a moon in the 12th, and then I know Julian Assange too has moon in the 12th, and you know he's in this perpetual imprisoned state, likely for life. You know, like I think it just might be interesting if it's more long term than just sort of I went to prison at some point.
Here's Charles Manson, he just got out of jail a few years ago, right? He was in jail since the early 70s, since 69 or 70, nothing like that. Yeah, I think we have to be more specific. And let's actually start with him, since we're talking about lifelong criminals, since we're talking about people who've spent most of their adult life in jail. Right, so I think that's really the distinction you're making, is not people who've been to jail, but people who spent most of their life in jail. Layla says she thinks it depends on what sent you to jail, but I don't know how that would necessarily distinguish as far as 12th isn't only jail, monastic cells too. It's indeed true, right? Although when we talk about monastic, we're not talking about the 12th house. We're talking about the 9th house. Right, because that's because the monastic is religion. So that's religious isolation, right? That's not, although what we can say is that, what I do think is that the meditation that we do, like for instance, okay, one of the things that people were talking about, spirituality, yogic meditation, that the tapas or the things that we do to bring us to spirituality is in the 12th. Right, so the things that we do by ourselves alone are the 12th. But the place of a monastic cell, they're not incarcerated. They can leave at any time. Right, they're not imprisoned. They're just isolated away. So that aspect of it is the 12th. But as a respect of it being monastic, which means there is a spiritual or religious component, the 12th isn't really connected to it, except as an isolation, as a form of isolation, in my opinion. All right, so first of all, let's look at the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th. Here we've got the 8th house opposing the ascendant. We've got the ruler of the 4th is the moon here. The moon is in the ruler of the 4th house is in the 10th house, and the ruler of the 12th is also Jupiter. And also look at how the moon is applying to Jupiter. So basically in this particular chart, we've got the moon, which is Fortuna, and which is the co-significator for all things, and which also represents capture, right, as ruler of the 4th, is applying to Jupiter, who is the ruler of the 12th and imprisonment. And it is her next application as well. And not only that, it is a square with a negative reception. Remember, we've talked about reception, where when a planet is in either the sign of another planet that it's applying to, or it's in its own sign and applying to another planet, that's a type of reception. But there can be negative receptions as well. And in this particular case, the moon is applying to Jupiter, who's in the sign of her fall, right? So that is in and of itself also a difficult thing. But we can see here that the 12th house is aspecting the ascendant. And also look at how the part of fortune is in Cancer. The moon is the ruler of the part of fortune, and that's square to Jupiter. So, and also The moon is in Aquarius, which is ruled by Saturn. Saturn's in Aquarius as well. Saturn is what? Saturn is rejoices in the 12th. So even with this connection of Saturn, the moon, because of course, Saturn also is restrictions and limitations. Yes. So that would be even that kind of shows it. So I think this is more indicative. So this, once again, this specificity is more indicative than the idea of, oh, hey, when you see moon in the 12th, it means that the person's going to spend a lot of their life in jail, right? So this man spent a lot of his life in jail. Now, here's the other thing. Assange and the other guy that you mentioned were both involved in kind of secret, in either, were involved with secrets. Or Silk Road. Now, wasn't Silk Road part of the dark web? So we've got fourth house, we've got 8th house, we've got 12th house. Remember what I've called those? Secrets. I've called those the secret. Those are the houses of secrets, of the unseen. So what I'd love to know is, and maybe we've got Julian Assange, I might have Julian Assange in here, but what I'd love to know in respect to that is what house rules, what house does the moon rule in the 12th house in those charts? Because if the moon rules the 4th or something like that, or the 8th or something like that, then it could be that they're in prison because of secrets, right? So something like that. But here we can see very much this 12th house thing with Charles Manson. So what I would be more interested in is the ruler of the 12th with the ruler of the ascendant, or aspecting the ruler of the ascendant, or aspecting the ascendant, or with the moon. This is a very, you know, like I said, this is really like, oh wait, the first thing that the moon does, the next thing the moon is doing is to the ruler of the 12th. Is this person going to go to jail? Or does this person have some kind of self-undoing that's really difficult for them? Right, so that's what I wouldn't necessarily always think jail, right? You see moon, you see Jupiter, not everybody has gone to jail. Very few people go, you know, a very small percentage of the population goes to jail, right? So I see moon, Jupiter, the first thing moon, Jupiter, and Jupiter ruling the 12th, the first thing I'm gonna actually think is, does this person have some kind of self-undoing that gets the better of them? And of course, in this particular case, it's the truth. It would be, right? And of course, and it led them to jail as well. I use the 10th house for mother. So here's I use generally the 10th house for mother, but here's the thing. So the 4th house was considered the house of parents, and then with the medieval period, it became kind of solidified around the father. But what I've found is that when the moon or Venus are in the 4th house, that the person either comes from a matriarchal household or were raised primarily by their mother, or by a female relative, or a female parent. But it's worked almost every single time that I've seen. Like I said, moon or Venus, the important parent is a female, is what I've seen. In which case, then you would switch. Often, what you find sometimes is that the father's not around, or you switch it around. What I found to be the best. So in this case, Saturn ruled moon next to Rahu. Yeah, right. Oh, and wait, you remember he was, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't he an orphan?
Nah, I looked at the Wikipedia page, just a quick scan, but it said she did time for armed robbery or something like that, some sort of jail time. So I wanted to see what the derived house looked like.
Interesting. So that would be the 12th and the 4th. 12th and the 10th, rather. And who's
so it wouldn't be just the 10th house. It would be I thought it would be the 10th from the 1st.
No, it'd be the 10th from the 1st would be the mother, but the mother's incarceration would be the 12th from the 10th.
Got it.
Right, and that's the same. And look, the moon is a 9th, but the moon is a significator for mother, and she's squaring the 12th from the 10th. On some level, even if we were looking at it this way, right? The Saturn Rahu moon by whole sign would be the 10th. And Saturn would also rule the 12th from the 10th, right? So either way, we've got the moon with the 12th from the 10th, or we've got the moon squaring the 12th from the 10th. So know how I'm always saying that when we look whole sign versus quadrant, we should be able to see the same message, but it may not always be the same planets giving us the same message. In this case, the Jupiter squaring the moon gives us this by quadrant, and then by whole sign, the moon with the Saturn gives us the quadrant, gives us the same issue. Okay, so Christopher, I'm glad you brought up a person, the difference between someone who's gone to jail and someone who spent life in jail. And even like, you know, like a Snowden, Assange, the other guy that you mentioned, that Silk Road, even those two guys haven't spent most of their adult lives in jail. They've been in jail for a protracted amount of time, but they haven't, like this guy's been in jail for almost 30 years. You know, I think he just came out in what, 2012 or 2015 or something like that. So very interesting. What's that?
It's worth looking. It's worth looking at their charts, but kind of in both of their cases, like Ross Ulbricht and Julian Assange, depending on what you know how you look at it or whatever, they're in jail permanently for reasons that could be considered unjust, or, you know, it's not like they went out and killed someone and they were in jail. It's like symbolically there's this weird play going on. But in terms of Ross Ulbricht, who's the Silk Road founder, he has 2 life sentences. You know, Julian Assange is about to be extradited, you know, like, so, but depending on who you ask, they're both innocent.
Yes, yeah, well, exactly, and that's really important. Depending on who you ask, is definitely and of course that doesn't really matter, does it? Like why they're in there, for what reason they're in there, or whether it's just or not. I mean, that would be something. That's another thing on top of this, right? Oh, Anne Louise, if you wanna IMGUR Assange's, he might be in here. Hold on a second. I don't think he is. Oh, he is. And it's an A, not a double A. It's only an A, but we'll go with it. As you can see, I have it. All right. All right. So yes, yes indeed, there's the ruler of let's see, what is the moon ruling? The moon rules the 9th. The moon rules the 9th in this, but she rules the natural 8th. Right? She rules the natural 8th in this in the whole, she rules the whole sign 8th. So there's the occulted, secretive, even the fact that Scorpio, the moon's in Scorpio, and look at that's another scorpionic thing that we just saw, right? We saw Jupiter in Scorpio with the moon, right? And so what we could maybe say is that this person is remember, because also the 12th house is a house of isolation. So actually, that's something I didn't, with all of this negativity that we've kind of looked at with the 12th, I didn't really talk about the useful aspect of the 12th. And so remembering that Saturn is labor, what I always say to people when they have things in the 12th is, especially when they have Saturn or when they have a planet in its own sign or whatever, is that it's about the usefulness of your labor in isolation. So often, like, or even like, remember when we were seeing Vedius Valence and he said, hey, when you find the ruler of the ascendant in the 12th, that's not good. But it also can mean that that person is attracted to things that they do in isolation, that they do by themselves. Ava, who's got the Jupiter in Aries in the 12th, depending on what house Jupiter rules, that area of life might be something she likes to do by herself or in complete isolation. And when we were looking at Mercury, one of the things that we were also looking at was writers, and of course, writers need to work in isolation. They need to write in isolation. And one of the things that people do in isolation is research, right? So research is one of the main things that I tend to see with people who are researchers of any kind, musicologists, any kind of researchers, scientific researchers, stuff in the 12th, where they can be alone, where they are in isolation, where they're doing whatever. So that would be the first thing I think when I see the moon in the 12th in this chart. I think, this person's really into isolation. This person's and since we're talking about the 9th house based on the Alkebusius, I'd say this person is interested in knowledge in secret knowledge, or right, because Scorpio is already about things that are hidden or mute, right? Scorpio is a mute sign. The ninth house has Cancer on it, which is also mute. Mercury is there. So this person is interested in gathering information, in silent information, or information that should be silent, right? And then here's the moon, that silent, whatever that silent thing is that the Mercury is curious about, there it is in the 12th, and that's what leads them to confinement. But also with the moon in the 12th, it's going to say that the person naturally is attracted to isolation. The person is naturally attracted to doing things alone or doing things in isolation, right? So I would see that more. I would see that more so when I looked at it, as opposed to saying, oh, this person is going to go to jail. Now, Libra's on the 12th, on the cusp of the 12th, and Scorpio is, what's the damn word that people always use? Oh, it's when you, intercepted. So I'm going to look at both. Is there a connection between the moon and Venus? No. Is there a connection between moon and Mars? Not really. But look at how there's a connection between Mars and Venus. And then who's the ruler of the ascendant? Now, there is a connection between the moon and Mars. And there's a connection between the ruler of the ascendant and Mars. Let's see. Note I looked at both charts and holds on. There was a Gokulin study that saw lots of writers with moon in the 12th. Oh, and Julian Assange writes, right? You know, he's basically, he more is a collector of information than he is a writer, but he also is a writer. And that's absolutely correct. We saw, and when we saw, I think Hemingway and a few other people, there were either moons in the, he's an editor. Okay. Oh, and that makes sense with the publishing, with the ninth in publishing, or the ninth in, with the ninth in the dissemination of information. To make the distinction, in the early period, the ninth house was called the house of knowledge and represented all teachers and all students. And it would, any kind of knowledge that was coming, that was being, you know, kind of being put forth or being disseminated, was coming from the ninth house. And not specifically like what we have with like the third. That means also all education was considered in the ninth, not the third for primary school and the ninth for you know, higher education. So in this particular chart, what's really going on is the moon is going to the aspect of the sun, the trine to the sun, who's the ruler of the ascendant, I mean the ruler of the midheaven. And sure enough, he's a celebrated person who has gone to jail. Wonder what will happen to this guy. Well, let's look. So last week, or 2 weeks ago, when we looked at the part of fortune, I wanted to teach something called zodiacal releasing. And zodiacal releasing is basically, you choose the point, you choose something like the part of fortune, and then each sign has a certain amount of years connected to it. And so with each of those years, they go into a different period of life. So the first thing I want to bring your attention to are two things. The ruler of the ascendant is in the 12th house. Now, it's within 5 degrees of the cusp, but it's not in the same sign. So in that particular case, I don't always, you know, if a planet is within 5 degrees of a cusp, I usually give it to the other house. But in this particular case, since it's not in the same sign, I don't always do that. So notice also that Jupiter is the ruler of the part of fortune. And if we're looking at this from a whole sign perspective, which we would be when we look at the whole, which we would be when we look at the ruler, when we look at the part of fortune as an ascendant, then we see that the Jupiter is naturally in the 12th house with the moon. So in my opinion, that's a stronger testimony for being in jail for a long time than just the moon itself. And then as well, remember that we were looking at the ruler of the 12th being Mars for Scorpio and Venus. And look, it's only the last degree. I mean, her last 23 minutes or whatever, her last 33 minutes are on the cusp of the 12th house. So really on some level, even though Venus is the ruler of the cusp, Mars has a major aspect of the 12th. And look at how he is in the 12th from the part of fortune with the Rahu. And let's see what else we got going on here. What about what's going on with Saturn? Oh, and look at how the Saturn is opposing the ascendant. So now we've got the ruler of the 12th from the part of fortune opposing the ascendant. Remember how in Charles Manson's chart we saw the ruler of the 12th house opposing the ascendant? Now we've got the ruler of the 12th from the part of fortune opposing the ascendant. And well, if Jupiter were direct, Jupiter would be applying to it as well. So I think that the testimonies for it are, once again, usually we can't use just one testimony. That's my general feeling. Like I just said, oh, hey, if I see the moon in the 4th, I see Venus in the 4th, then usually it means such and such. And there are other things where I might say that. But ultimately, I'm almost always looking for confirmation with more than one significate or more than one testimony. So yeah, the moon in the 12th could be some kind of testimony, but like I said, if I just looked at this chart, I might think, oh, this person likes to do things alone. This person likes to do things in isolation. Chart ruler and the moon are in there. Person likes to do things on their own. In Ulbricht, moon in Aquarius applying square to Saturn. But so once again, what's the ascendant? Where is Saturn? Oh, so wait, Saturn must be in the 6th house then if the moon's in the 12th? If you've got the chart, create an IMGUR link and go ahead and send it to us. I thought what I might also do is look for Ted Bundy, because I think Ted Bundy's still in jail.
You better be.
Let's do it with whole sign, just to do something different. Oh, he's dead? But he died in jail, didn't he, Olivia? I'm almost positive he died in jail. Executed. Oh, perfect. Even better. Okay, so let's look at 4, 8, and 12 in this chart. We didn't look at 4 and 8. Oh, we did look at a little bit with Julian. Let's see. So 8 is Jupiter. 4 is Mars. Moon is the ruler of the 12th here. And look at how Moon and Mars are together. So Moon and Mars are together here with with K2. That's interesting. Thank you. Okay, Moon and Mars are together. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see what else. We've got the Saturn on the part of fortune. We've got the Saturn in the 1st house, or really in the 12th. The Saturn's in the 12th, right? If we're not, now we're only looking whole sign, but I'm always going back and forth. So this Saturn and this part of fortune would actually be in the 12th, except by whole sign, in which case it wouldn't be. So let's just stick with whole sign, so I'm not making it too difficult. Well, certainly this Moon and the Mars is saying something. Who is the ruler of the 12th? Oh, Moon. And who's the ruler of the ascendant? The Sun. Oh, look at how Moon, Mars, and Sun, Moon, Mars, and Sun are all together in the same house. So remember what I said earlier? Oh, and what degree is rising? 9 degrees is rising. 9 degrees of Leo is rising. Oh, wait, 25 degrees of Leo is rising. The moon is the most closely trining, and the moon is the ruler of the 12th. So, Christopher, you asked me last week or was it the week before when we were looking at Michelangelo, and there were no applications or separations, and the only applying thing that we saw was Venus applying to the ascendant. And you said, oh, does that mean that maybe things to the ascendant are just as strong? I'm going to say the jury's out on it. Just the ascendant, in my opinion, not as strong, but prominent, but creating prominence, creating visibility, right? The ascendant is about visibility. So it looks like even when there are aspects to the ascendant, we're looking at visibility. But in this chart, it's very obvious that all of these planets are working together, and we have what's called an assembly, right? So when planets are within 15 degrees of each other, right? So 2 to 17 is 15 degrees. So this Sun, K2, Mars, and Moon are in an assembly. They're all working together. So the Sun is working for, the Sun, who's the ruler of the ascendant, is working for Mars, who's the ruler of the 4th house we know is the house of secrets. And then Moon is the 12th house, which is and remember also the Mars is the capture, right? So maybe that's an interesting way we can find out who gets captured and who doesn't get captured based on some of this. I'm freeballing, I'm you're spitballing, but that's really very interesting. Before we go to Ulbricht, I want to go to Bernie Madoff because he's in jail now. Okay, Bernie Madoff. So looking at 4, 8, and 12, Mars, Jupiter, isn't that another? So we got another Leo rising, Mars, Jupiter, Cancer, Mars, Jupiter, Moon. Madoff, didn't he died in jail though, didn't he, Bernie Madoff? Well, what do we see here? The moon it's a new moon. The moon's with the sun. He is dead, yes, this summer. The moon is with the sun. The sun is the ruler of the ascendant and the part of fortune. The moon is the ruler of the 12th. So I think what we're finding is what I said, and look at how the Jupiter is opposing the ascendant. Jupiter is the ruler of the 8th. Incarceration. Mars, what's going on with Mars? Mars at 4 is in the 10th. Anybody he's touching in any interesting ways? Doesn't really look that way, but 4th is, so the capture is up here in the 10th. The incarceration is opposing the ascendant, and the ruler of the ascendant is with the jail. All right, let's look at Ulbricht. And then what we're going to do after we look at Ulbricht, we're going to come back and we're going to look at self-undoing. And actually, you all should be go ahead and put your charts if you want to into the chat as well, and we'll look at self-undoing. So we've been looking at this mostly for prison at this particular point, but we can also look at it for self-undoing. So a new chart, Pisces rising. So 4 is Gemini, 8 is Libra, and 12 is Scorpio. So this looks like it's a whole sign chart. Oh, but okay. And so Mercury, Venus, and Saturn. First of all, once again, like you say, you've got the moon in Aquarius in the 12th. And I thought you said that the moon, the moon is applying to the square of Saturn, who is the ruler of the 12th. Where is Jupiter? The Jupiter is applying to the sextile of Saturn. And note, Jupiter is in the sign of Saturn, applying to Saturn, which means Jupiter is pushing nature. This is a type of reception. So Jupiter, the ruler of the ascendant of this chart, is pushing nature to this Saturn. Not just that, but the exaltation ruler is also pushing to it. And Silk Road was involved with lots of kind of illicit sexual stuff, wasn't it, Christopher? As well, wasn't it like, snuff movies and, child sex abuse stuff and stuff of that nature? Drugs mostly. Oh, it tried to be mostly ethical. Okay. So there's the Jupiter. Ha! There's the Jupiter trying to be ethical, but not quite. Drugs mostly. Okay, no, try to be more interesting. Okay, there's Paula. Great. Okay, so I want to start with. So once again, as we can see, in order to often see if there is some kind of jail-related thing. Now, other thing I'm looking for is 8th house. Oh, boom! Venus is the ruler of the 8th. She's in the ascendant. She's in the 1st house. 4th house, Mercury. Now, that's the one that doesn't necessarily connect with anything. But do you see? It looks like we need to see 8th and 12th involved in order to find incarceration and imprisonment. Right, so we saw, and indeed, Venus is the incarceration in the 1st, very, very strong. Taurus is where? On the 3rd house, communication, so the internet, that makes perfect sense. The Saturn's in the 9th, and remember, once again, 9th is knowledge, and Scorpio is kind of hidden, would be things that are hidden, or that we have to excavate or investigate to find, right, because it's things that are hidden. So sure enough, the Silk Road was in the dark web, And of course, Saturn represents darkness. And then of course, the moon represents light, but she's in a Saturn sign, which represents darkness. And the moon is exalted in Taurus, which is the third house, which would be our web. And so there's our dark web. Very interesting. So what's this person's self-undoing? Well, this person's self-undoing is wanting to do things that are hidden or forbidden, right? And even remember, the 8th house is the taboo. This person is interested in taboos and things that are hidden. So, and also with the moon there, right? So, yeah, this is very, very interesting chart and very descriptive about what's going on, about what we end up seeing with people. All right, let's move back. That was Ulbricht. Herr Ulbricht. Okay, let's look at Diana here. Okay, now let's look at there we go. How we might look at from a more personal standpoint. So when we have Aquarius rising, then we already know that there's an issue because Saturn will rule the 1st and the 12th. So it's me, but it's me and my demons. So think about, so-and-so and their demons, right? That's a term that we tend to use. He's grappling with his demons. He's wrestling with his demons, right? So that's a 12th house concept. When you're wrestling with your demons, they're not the good kind, right? They're not the 11th house kind that you wrestle with. It's the 12th house kind of demon that you wrestle with, right? So when we're wrestling with our demon, that's where we are. And so in this particular case, when we have Aquarius rising, that's what we would usually find is the person is wrestling with demons. They're wrestling with their own personal demons. That's built into the reason the person incarnated. And of course, remembering that Saturn is the ruler of the 12th, but Saturn is also enjoying the 12th. So in this particular, in this particular chart, we've got a retrograde Saturn. We've been talking about the retrogradation and how there can be a going back to things that are not useful instead of a moving forward to things that are. The main way that I tend to see that Saturn can work against people as a self-undoing is paralysis and self-limitation. So they can limit themselves. Now, also, if we were able to see, let's say, for instance, Saturn were ruler of the 4th house, or ruler of the 3rd house, or ruler of the 10th house, or ruler of the 7th, then we could say maybe if it's ruler of the 4th, that the father or one of the parents might be limiting them, and that the negative aspects of their negative self-undoing may come from the parental relationship. Same thing if it's 7th house, it could be that 7th house issues. Maybe we'd see that more if the ruler of the 12th was in the 7th, but we could also maybe see it with the ruler of the 7th and the 12th. What we would maybe see with the ruler of the 7th and the 12th is having relationships see the light of day is the problem, right? So clandestine relationships, affairs, people who aren't necessarily available, right? Because the relationship isn't able to be publicly announced or publicly acknowledged. Things of that nature. So, but like I said, in this particular one, it would be around self-doubt, anxiety, fear, paralysis, inability to move forward, pessimism especially, but then also things have to be a specific way in order for me to accept them or to move forward, right? And if I don't believe it, I won't move. If I don't believe in it, or if I don't believe it's correct, or if it's not, I will not go against my value system or my idea. Remember, because fixed air, Aquarius is fixed air. So when we have a fixed air, the ruler of the 12th and fixed air, then my ideas, I hold to my ideas, and I might not come around. It might be hard for this person to compromise in certain areas, and that can be a self-undoing. But it's important, if anything, it's a very important thing to be looking at, 1, the planet that rules the 12th, 2, any planet in the 12th, as what we need to stay conscious about, because it's the thing that will slip us up. It's the thing that will undo us. It's the thing that will fuck us over. And often it's our blind spot. So this Saturn, it's where I come from, but this Saturn as ruler of the ascendant means that it's the inherent inclination. This person may be cautious. This person might do things slowly. Oh, matter of fact, Diana's always saying, I'm slow. That's something that Diana, when we were doing the traditional astrology class, Diana, the first thing she would say is, oh, well, I'm slow, so I'm still processing this information. So we know already that she's going to exhibit some of these aspects of Saturn. And now we know, because it's the ruler of the 1st and the 12th, that some of them are going to be useful and some of them are not. Okay, here's Paula. So we were going to look at, well, yeah. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just saying thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Was any of that correct?
Yeah. I kind of see also my father is an Aquarius, and I feel like there's a lot of like mental constructs that I've had to try to unlearn over time.
I love that.
From my childhood. Yeah.
Yeah, and Saturn is, and of course, Saturn represents father, right? Sun and Saturn are the significators for father. And what did you say? Mental constructs. There's our Aquarius. So perfect example. All right, so one of the first things we were looking for is, no, wait, so we were looking for Paula and her labor. So what was the labor situation again? You said you had easy labor or what?
The labor was easy because I had didn't really feel anything, and then I had 2 C-sections. But with the first child, it took me a while to get pregnant while we were trying to get pregnant. And with the second one, I was on bed rest for 3 months for a while in the pregnancy.
Okay, you were put on bed rest. Now I think that, if anything, could be this. Okay, right? So we see that the Jupiter is Sagittarius is on the 12th. The Jupiter is the ruler. And notice how it's in retrograde and in detriment. Your Jupiter is within a few degrees of mine. We're born a month apart, and so our Jupiters are really close to each other. And so Jupiter is in detriment and retrograde there, right? So Mercury rules Gemini, which represents things that are quick. And of course, if you have a C-section, then that's going to be pretty quick. But I could see a Jupiter in retrograde, a retrograde Jupiter in detriment, having to be on bed rest as well. So I think that that's kind of interesting. But let's see this as but let's look at this as, what is the self-undoing? Now, remember, we're looking at we're not looking at a whole sign chart. So we know that from the whole sign, Mars would be the ruler of the 12th, right? And we also know, so we have Jupiter as the ruler of the 12th using this, but Mars is the ruler of the 12th by other. But so with Jupiter, if we use Jupiter as the ruler, now we have the same situation as we have with Diana, right? Because now the person themselves is also their own problem, is also, so their own demons. Now, their demons would do with Mercury things. And Mercury rules the tongue and speech. So there could be issues around speech. And then Mercury rules writing, reading, arithmetic. There could be, so ultimately it could be issues around speech. That would be mostly, so there could be talking too much, not talking enough, talking without saying anything, saying what's not necessary. It could be really more of that. Let's see if anything, if it's with Mars. No, it's not, but it's relatively close to the Saturn in separation, and nothing else is really applying to it. So it's kind of, that's one good thing. Nothing else is really applying to it. So that's kind of a good thing. So it won't involve it. But once again, now if we looked at the Mars instead as the ruler of the 12th, then we've got this Mars-Saturn conjunction. And so this could be, oh, Mars-Saturn is super serious, super driven, and will push even when the answer is no. So that's what I think also it could show itself as, in there's this pushing nature to this person. And look at how it's also ruled by Jupiter. So this person has a pushing, driven nature, right? The Mars is pushing forward. The Saturn is deadly serious. And also Mars and Saturn both represent Capricorn, right? They're both the rulers of Capricorn, and Capricorn represents, and Saturn of course is work. And so Capricorn is where Saturn really gets into work. And Mars in Capricorn is usually a workaholic. And so this Mars-Saturn thing here can represent that same kind of driven, go, go, go move, but it can also represent I meet with frustration. So what I think could be a possibility is two things. We've got this issue of whatever's going on with the Mercury-related Jupiter and confusion, difficulties with speech, etc. But then we've got this Mars-Saturn, which is sometimes I push too hard, and I still don't get what I want. Or sometimes I don't know when to push and when not to. Or sometimes I'm too serious and I don't know how to relax. And so I think those, and of course, look at how the moon's in the 12th in Scorpio. So this person has difficulty really connecting to joy, can have difficulty connecting to joy. They can enjoy life, but they can have difficulty themselves connecting to joy. Specifically because this Mars-Saturn wants them to be useful all the time. So I think the self-undoing with this person is this need to be useful, this need to be doing something useful, this need to be going and moving, etc. I think that's part of the self-undoing with this chart.
Very true.
Okay, fantastic. Okay.
Very true. Or even the talking, either talking too much or sometimes really needing to say something, but saying, should I bother to speak up or, or not?
So not knowing
one side or the other.
Right, so it can be both of them, right? So one is talking too much and the other is not speaking up when you need to. It's
Right.
both sides of the coin. All right, looking at Anna-Louise here.
Thank
you. Yeah, you're welcome. So Anna-Louise got the same thing. Sag rising and Jupiter on the, Jupiter ruling the 1st and the 12th. How interesting all these. And she's got the Jupiter in Virgo, right? So the Jupiter detriment here. And so what I know Anna-Louise, we've been together since my very first session, and she doesn't talk very much, but but we know each other. And what I'm going to say is the main self-undoing is self-criticism. Self-criticism that keeps you from expanding, right? Because this Jupiter wants to expand, but it's not always necessarily able to. So it will criticize itself and then not, right? It will find all the details and all the reasons that it's not doing things correctly, or all the reasons that things aren't in the right place for me to move forward, or all the reasons that, etc. And so this was, and look at also, we've got this Neptune in the 12th. So Neptune is not always in reality. And see, Jupiter can also be out of reality too, right? He rules Pisces, which is non-reality. But so we've got an issue maybe of daydreaming or of dreaminess in a way that isn't really useful. And then we've got this Jupiter who, even when I want to go forward, I will criticize myself and judge myself. Remember, Jupiter is judges and lawyers and the law, right? And so this person might actually put themselves under very specific rules that they're not able to actually do. And that keeps them from moving forward, right? Because Jupiter is the law and judge. And so this person is judging themselves all the time in their head.
Yeah, that's correct. You can say that.
All right, Leila Kabiri. Okay, now Leila herself has a quite, she's got this, isn't this fascinating? Almost every single chart we've had has had the same planet ruling both, I think, ruling both the 1st and the 12th, right? So the mental constructs version of Saturn is ruling the ascendant, but the work, I don't want to call it work in this particular case, the status conscious Saturn is ruling the 12th, right? Because Capricorn is how we climb the mountain to the peak, to the summit. So Capricorn's always interested in the summit, always interested in how to get forward. Also in how its reputation, how it's being seen reputation-wise. Now look at how there's this thing with Saturn and Venus, and Venus is applying to them. Although, as I mentioned, she's just outside of Moiety, right? So she's preparing, she is preparing to apply, right? But if we use whole sign for this, then we know that both of them are in the same sign. Now, when we did our Venus session, one of the things that came up about Venus was Venus represents buffoonery and enjoyment. She represents enjoyment, pleasure, but she also represents intoxication and buffoonery. I think intoxication can be a problem in this chart. Or Venusian things. Venusian things, right? Saturn's the ruler, right? But Venus is the triplicity ruler, and Saturn is the ruler himself. So what I think is there may be issues. Now, this chart is different. There may be issues in this chart. There may be body issues in this chart, physical body issues, because remember, Venus rules beauty. So this person could be judging themselves around their physical appearance and or not satisfied with their physical appearance because the Venus is retrograde. This person also could be doing certain things that make the physical appearance go back and forth or change, that make the physical appearance change. So there's something about this Venus and the Saturn as ruler of the first and the 12th. I feel like a lot of them have to do with physical appearance. There could also be issues around religion that have created self-undoing. Either a trying to conform to religion, which you just kind of, after a while you just realize you couldn't, or not conforming may have created problems. Do any of those sound right, Layla? Are you with us?
Yeah, I'm with you. The first part's for sure.
The physical, or the intoxication, or the physical.
Oh yeah, I worked in the fine wine industry for like 10 years.
Ah.
Yeah.
So the Saturn and the work. So the Saturn as the worker, the Saturnian labor with the Venusian pleasure, and so.
And you're kind of, yeah.
So the problem is balancing work and pleasure.
Yeah, and it's turning work into pleasure and pleasure into work. Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but in this chart we can see that it can become a self-undoing.
Yeah, it almost did.
Okay. Very good. Very interesting. What about the religion thing? Nothing?
I think it's impacted me externally because, like, my family's from Iran, so I have to like negotiate that when I visit them. But in terms of my own religion, not really. I mean, my Jupiter's in the 5th, and I take a more literal interpretation. Like I'm a hedonist.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, my faith system is literally based on kind of what gives like myself or people kind of pleasure. I don't really believe in much else. I don't see the point to it.
And look at how the Mercury is with the Uranus and the Neptune here, right? So it's all about acting out. It's all about acting out and not conforming, and not conforming to specific boundaries. And it's the ruler of the 8th. So this person will cross the taboo line. This person will use pleasure to cross the taboo line. So that's very okay. Thank you, Lilo. That's very interesting. All right, let's see. Oh, so Monica wanted to. Okay, here comes Monica. Monica, are you with us? I saw you coming in and out. Are you with us now?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm here. Yeah, my Wi-Fi it's the Wi-Fi, so I do apologize. But yes, I'm here.
Oh, no problem. No judgment at all. Everybody's doing their thing.
Thank you.
Okay, so here we go. Finally, we've got the rule of the first and the first. Mercury in the first house. So this person's interested in communication. This person's interested in reading and writing. This person's interested in information. This person may love gossip, right? But now we look at the 12th house. Now notice how Venus or rather Taurus is intercepted there, but we've got the moon and we've got Mars. So Mars is the ruler. So this person, and look at how the moon's in Aries and Mars is in Taurus. This person may have anger problems. That would be the first thing I think, right? Mars rules 12, or it can have a act before I think problem. And certainly with the moon there, certainly with the moon in the Aries sun, I have moon in Aries within 3 degrees of this. Moon in Aries often does things rather quickly. Same thing with this. I was about to write impulsivity. Yeah, exactly. And then Mercury is also fast. this person might be a little bit too fast for their own good. So that's because I know I am. I have Sag rising with Jupiter and Gemini and Moon in Aries. I walk fast. You know how fast I talk from being here right now. I do everything very, very quickly. That could be part of the self-undoing of this person. But I think mostly, remember, Mars represents rashness. Look at how the Jupiter is there too. Right, so the Jupiter is really close. So Jupiter is the ruler of the 11th. So that could mean that there could be false friends in this chart. We haven't even talked about secret enemies or anything like that. This is a chart that looks like there could be secret enemies. Monica, have you ever had any secret enemies or false friends?
Oh my gosh, you're speaking. Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay, so now we see, right? So as I've been saying all along, we don't want to discount these old ancient understandings, because this shit does show up, right? So
Can I say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I say something real quick? This is so funny that my dad just mentioned to me yesterday that my brother has said that he can't be around me for more than 15 minutes. And it's just like, oh my gosh, my own brother. So this is just this astrology. I'm so blown away by how in tune this is with our date of births and I don't know. So anyway, yes, that just makes me think about this. Just happened yesterday with my dad telling me that my own brother said this.
Why did he say that? But why did he say that?
Oh, I know exactly why. We were having a dinner together, and he can be very undermining, sarcastic, and he was talking to my nephew saying that you're not that good, and where I was like, yes, you are that good, and I could tell when it was kind of like agitating him a little, because I'm very positive, and like you said, I talk very fast, but I'm like, Mason, you're really, really good. And my brother's like, well, I guess he's okay. But I think because I was just so positive and building my nephew up, it kind of aggravated him a little. And that's why he made that comment to my dad that he can't be around me for more than 15 minutes.
You countered him. You combated him. You combated his viewpoint, which is Mars. So that's interesting. I mean, the interesting thing about that is the ruler of the third is brothers. So brothers is the third house, which is ruled by Cancer. And look at how the moon, the ruler of Cancer, is in the 12th. So we could basically say, that the brother's a false friend. The brother himself is a false, and also Mars is the ruler of brothers. Mars is the natural ruler of brothers. So we can see, and Moon is in the sign of Mars. So we can see that there probably has been for quite a while some difficulty between you and the brother.
Yes,
absolutely. And that, and I won't say specifically enmity, but certainly anger, counter. Part of what your brother doesn't like is you don't back down. That's what I would say. Even as positive as you might be, you don't back down.
That's good stuff.
Right.
Did you say we'll be able to go back and watch this? You post this on?
Yeah, exactly. And you know what I'll do is I'll give you the link to I'll put the link to the chat. Christopher, did you want to put IMGUR your chart, or did you already? Or is he still with us? Yeah, put it in. Because I'm going to find the.
Can I ask a question while he's putting this in? And it's just a general question. So I come from a background of, Jesus is Christ and like the whole organized religion. So sometimes when it comes to this astrology, I am really working it out because I mean, this stuff is so dead on, but it's just this whole, the notion where it says like, astrology is demonic. And so I'm really in this battle of just trying to, I don't know, be at peace with, if I'm making sense. I'm torn between, this really Jesus is Lord, but this stuff is just so on point. So I don't know, can you just kind of speak to that?
Absolutely. So here's the important thing. So what is one of the terms that we use for Jesus? One of the terms that we use for Jesus is light of the world, right? What is the light of the world? What's the light of the world? You have any idea what the light of the world is?
The sun.
Yes,
the sun.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's father.
The sun is the light of the world. Basically, what most people don't understand is that Jesus is a sun god, right? He dies, and then what happens? After 3 days, he's resurrected. When is usually his time of resurrection? Spring. When's usually the beginning of what used to be the beginning of the year until 1778? March 25th. So, and now, okay, so continuing, Layla, Christopher, anybody who wants to kind of join in here. The sun represents what? We just did the sun last week. What was one of the main things that the sun is called? Sun's called God. Sun's called God. And the sun is in joy where? The sun's joy is the ninth house of religion. So the sun is God. The sun is the source of all. The sun is the center of the solar system. The sun is the primum mover, the prima mobile of astrology itself. The sun is the eye in the sky and is all forms of divination. What I'll say is this. I myself personally don't believe that, Jesus is the most important, or that Christianity is primary. That's the first thing. The second thing is I don't believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God. So that's what you're talking about. What you're saying is that, hey, if the Bible is the inerrant word of God, then its warnings on divination should be heeded. How are we going to deal with that? You deal with it by realizing that the Bible, that you either believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God or you don't. And in my particular case, I don't. Which means if you believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, you shouldn't be eating shellfish or shrimp or oysters or anything like that. You shouldn't be wearing polyester or blended cloth, right? Because in Deuteronomy, it's in there, and the same as it with other things. So what we tend to find with all Christians and what we tend to find with all religions is that people tend to pick what it is that they want to, what they will believe, and they leave the things that they don't want. Right? Even your pastor will say, oh, hey, that part, don't think about that part where in Kings where they talk about all the blah, blah, blah. Think about this thing instead. And so if your pastor can so easily pull a portion out of the Bible and tell you not to look at it, then you can do it too. You can do it too. If you can pull that portion out of the Bible that says, hey, divination is demonic, and you can do it, and you can say, you know what, that's garbage. I'm not going to accept that. Because is there anything, I guess the most important thing is, do you feel anything around the demonic when you work with working here with me right now? Do you feel anything around the demonic when you work with your other astrology teacher? I'm pretty sure it was Ava that asked that, right? Etc. And so being from, it sounds like you're Southern. My mother lives in Atlanta, and we know that the southern part of the United States is called the Bible Belt. So culturally, Bible is everywhere, and biblical inerrancy is kind of like the water that is drunk. But we all know people, including pastors, that do whatever the hell they want when they're not in church, right? They'll come into church and they'll talk about blah, 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 whatever, but they'll still commit adultery, be homosexuals, embezzle funds, especially embezzle funds, right? So what I have to say is that religion is man-made. If you're really interested in God, seek God, because as Gandhi says, God has no religion. God has no religion. Religion is a man-made construct, hopefully getting us closer to God. But ultimately, in my opinion, the 50 however many years that I've lived, what I really seem to notice is that religion can also be, and is most often, the main obstacle to true experience of God. I study on the down low for fear of judgment. Exactly, and that's because of social constructs, not because of God himself, right? What you need to be worried about is being judged by God, right? If you believe that doing this is going to incur God's wrath, then there's nothing I can say. There's nothing that I can say except that I don't believe that. But if you are only worried about other people because of this religious kind of neo-religious environment that you're in, then I would look at it again, because ultimately, what is it that you're trying to get to? Are you trying to get to God? Are you trying to get to God? Or are you trying to get approval of your peers that you're conforming correctly? just others, God made me the way I am, and I know I'm gifted. Exactly. So, and there's so many people, you know, one of the things that I find so interesting about astrology right now is that there's so many Black people involved with astrology and different kind of metaphysical and tarot and all these different things. When I first got into astrology back in the late 80s, or when I got into, you know, divination and spiritualism and all that other stuff back in 1988, there weren't that many. And it really had to do with the fact that most Black people were very, very Christian and very, very wary of any kind of well, oh, exactly. Well, Layla, why do you think that they had a problem with astrology?
Well, I think what they say is that, like, knowing sort of the future, divination would be sort of God's purview. So to practice astrology is kind of stepping in where you don't belong, or maybe doing something demonic. I also think too, on a more practical level, they're afraid that if you are practicing or worshiping other planets or gods, that you'd leave monotheism for polytheism. I don't think either of those things is like really a problem anymore. So they can kind of mutually coexist. Like if you want to be religious and practice astrology, like go for it.
Right. We know that, we certainly know that most of the astrologers, what is the name of William Lilly's most important book?
Christian astrology. Exactly. I was thinking about that while you were talking.
Right. But he did that on purpose. He did that in order to not incur the wrath of the authorities. The thing is, there is no, in my opinion, no, here's the other thing I want to mention. So recently I did a talk on Clubhouse about the differences between Western astrology and modern astrology and Vedic astrology. And I talked about how really our astrology comes from Hellenized Egypt, but more clearly, more kind of closely from medieval Islam. And that when medieval Islam got Indian astrology and Vedic astrology, they needed to basically erase anything that had to do with the infidel, anything that had to do with paganism, right? Because it's another Abrahamic religion. They also wanted to fuse it to philosophy and natural science. So it's the medieval Islamics who then kind of created this kind of natural science, raised the stature of astrology to this aspect of kind of a science. And that continued to be the case until the 18th century, the 19th century, really until Galileo. Okay, so until Galileo and scientific methods, because remember, Galileo is the person who separates astronomy from astrology. Until him, they're both the same thing. Observing the celestial bodies and also practicing astrology are the exact same thing. He separates that. So there's two things that are happening. There's the trying to make astrology more of a scientific pursuit, taking it away from the realm of magic, even though medieval Islam had all kinds of magical traditions, all kinds of humongous magical traditions. So taking it away from that and trying to make it into kind of a legitimate science of the time period. And then we see in the Renaissance period with people like Marsilio Ficino, how they try to bring it back into, how they try to bring the magical aspect back into it. And by that time, it's all over Europe. By that time, even Pope Julius II is using astrology to create a time to create the cornerstone of St. Peter's, 1509. Oh, did Christopher post this chart? Let's see. Let's find it.
Yeah, no, thank you. I didn't mean to take away from
you got me on it.
It was good. I needed to hear that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Did that help? Did that help you?
Yes. Do you all do this weekly? Or how often? I just saw this on every week. You said weekly?
Yeah, every Sunday.
Every Sunday, great. I'll be jumping on. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to have you. We're happy to have you here. This is it's a digression from the topic, but it's such an important topic itself. Because like I said, I was one of the only people. And when I told other Black people that I was into these things, I would get, oh, well, you better watch, the Bible says, my grandmother was an astrologer, and she tells me all the time about how my grandmother, when she got cancer right before she died, she stopped doing astrology and she went back to the Bible. She made a choice, my mother said. And all I can think is, who the fuck cares? Fuck that, who cares, right? It's between me and God. What's happening is between me and God. And somebody once said to me, when they found out I was gay and into some of these things, they said, what if you're wrong? What are you going to say to God? If you're wrong, what will you say to God? And I told him, I'll say this. I'm sorry. I thought you were less limited than this. So going on to Chris. Chris has got a Venusian. He's got a Venusian one. So issues around affection are and I say issues around affection because the Venus is in Virgo, she's fallen. So this person part of the self-undoing might be the way that they show affection, the ability to show affection or not. Virgo is a cold and dry sign. So this person might not be particularly demonstrative. We talked a little bit about this. We talked a little about this when I first saw your chart. This person might not be particularly demonstrative, and it might get them into trouble. There's all this stuff about people's love language. And this person's love language might be cleaning the house, or might be, cleaning the house, or might be, putting things back that were, they might even have a partner who is messy, and they put things back thinking that they're helping, and the partner gets upset, so that's how, so it's basically around the expression of love and pleasure, right? And so also a major thing, pleasure-wise, might be Venus house is 5th, which should be good for it, but the planets make it true. Well, the thing is that Venus in this chart is in the 4th, right? And I remember we talked about that because he was raised by his mother, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, I see what you're saying, Layla. You're talking about all the other stuff in the 5th that might be making the problem. Although the Saturn in Libra will mean that they like things that are deep and heavy, right? The Saturn, they can still enjoy themselves, but they enjoy themselves, and almost everything that they enjoy is around learning and reading, probably, right? Because the Mercury is there, or writing, or this person might do the Wordle thing. This person might Saturn in the 5th as a positive and negative side. Yeah, of course. I mean, you may have had problems having kids. You might have had a delay around having children. There could be, look at how you've got both the Mercury and the Saturn. It's nighttime. And so Mercury rules, and you have a child, right? Oh, crazy partying, is that what you, but remember, but the Venus is the ruler of the 5th. That's what you were talking about, Layla, got it. Oh, the crazy partying, and see the sun there, so the sun raging, and the Mercury and the Saturn. But see, the Saturn would be, you would think that the Saturn would make you maybe a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit more circumspect. Reserved, exactly, a little bit more circumspect.
It is true now. It took a while to kind of like undo some of that stuff. Like I always kind of look at Saturn in the 5th as being like, it's caused a lot of problems with indulgence with Venus and whatnot. But now that I'm like kind of out of that period, it's like very much learning and reserved. And
I think it's your Saturn in the 5th, right? Because most people that have Saturn in the 5th feel blocked, but it's because your Saturn's exalted and Venus is the ruler of the 5th, right? So you've got, Venus is already pleasure, the 5th is already her joy, you've got an exalted planet in the 5th. So that, I think that can create the problems. And then where's the Mercury? The Mercury is the ruler of the ascendant. So you got Mercury with the Saturn. Saturn rules the 9th and 10th. Did you party the most in college, in university?
That period of time, yeah, 20s.
Mm-hmm. So around the school period. So that's what I think is probably that you'd be in an environment that would create that, and that more than likely would be a learning environment. Notice also how the moon is applying to the Mercury that's in the 5th. So the moon is applying to a planet in the 5th. So the 5th house is so we've got a connection, and also the Saturn in the 5th is ruling the 9th. So we've got a connection between the 9th and the 5th. So I would say that probably it would have been mostly around the time of around school, more than likely university or even masters, or even the master's time period. And then, we didn't talk about zodiacal releasing, didn't we? We were gonna actually talk about. I was gonna talk about that. I was gonna talk about that during the part of fortune. What I'm gonna do is make another one where we talk about predictive techniques. So next week is predictive techniques. Everything, but we'll look just a little bit of progression. We'll look at not transits. What we're gonna look at mostly is Fredaria and zodiacal releasing, and then solar returns and things of that nature. But other, kind of ways that we can. Things that we can look at, or earlier things that we can look at for figuring out what's going to happen in the future. Yeah, so I think that, what were we going to say?
I was just going to say one thing to Layla's point. But yeah, as far as like games and stuff, I just have no interest in playing them, or like, you know what I mean? Like I could be considered a fun crusher.
Yeah,
serious.
There we go. There's Saturn, right? So
Yeah.
There's Saturn in the 5th. So that's the true Saturn in the 5th. Right, so but your Saturn's exalted, so this Saturn can enjoy. He can enjoy, but it's going to be like I said, serious hobbies, and more than likely, like this is the kind of person who reads Gödel or Bach for fun, or reads the encyclopedia for fun, or or has their own chemistry lab, or something like that, or creates dyes, or something like that. Like this is somebody who can enjoy themselves, but it's not going to be the things that we consider enjoyment, even though the partying streak is in there, right? And notice that the ruler of the 5th, Venus, is aspecting the ascendant, right? She's at 22, the ascendant is at 25. Notice also that the Saturn is aspecting, the planet in the 5th is aspecting. Wonderful having you, Monica. Please join us next week. Oh, I don't know if I have your email already, but if you'll leave it in the chat before you go, and I'll make sure you're on my list. Same thing for you, Ava.
Okay, will do. Thanks again so much for your time, your energy, and information. It's been good. I'll definitely put my information in next week.
Wonderful. Looking forward to seeing you then. So that would be, so we have, I guess we finished our thing. Okay, Ava, that's fantastic. And so we've kind of finished looking at our 12th house thing. So what I would say is this: if there's any part of the chart that you want to really keep close, that you want to keep close and you want to keep an eye on, it is the 12th house. You want to keep an eye on the 12th. Because, like I said, thank you, Monica. Like I said, that can become very much a place of a blind spot. It can become very much a place of the self-undoing because we're not paying attention. It can become very much, well, I mean, but see, here's the thing. She says, like my entire chart. When we have the planet that rules the ascendant, oh, Natalie, did you not? Yeah, go ahead and put it up. Did you put it in and I missed it? Sorry. If you have the ruler, yeah, go ahead and resend me the IMGUR link and we'll put you up. If you have, kind of like what Layla has. Oh, did I not get to Olivia too? Sorry about that. I know what happened. I got caught. I went off on a tangent with the religious question. Then you want to really be aware, like in the case of what's going on with Layla, or even with Diana. Layla and Diana, their chart ruler also rules the 12th house. And so that means that there's going to be more of a proclivity for 12th house issues to show up. So they're magnified. These 12th house things are magnified. Then as well, Layla's got the ruler of the ascendant in the 12th. So not only does she's got the ruler of the 12th in the 12th. Right, so that means two things. One, she can find the industry in the 12th. So she can work on her own, she can work without supervision, she can stay focused, all of that stuff. So all of that good Saturn stuff for the 12th house, she can do. But then we've got the retrograde Venus with the 12th house ruler, which means that pleasure, intoxication, sex, love, those kinds of things can become a problem. So just keep remembering that, and now we'll come to Natalie and Olivia.
Can I just ask quickly in general for the 12th house, when you have secret enemies, is there a way to tell why those people are your enemies?
Yeah, there can be. I mean,
You can describe the nature of them, right? With triplicity rulers.
What's
I
that?
don't know which kind of rulership scheme you use, Garth, but you can describe the nature of your hidden enemies using trip rulers, right?
Yes, you can, and or even the ruler of the 12th itself. Yes, you can. I mean, but she's asking why, which is more difficult, which I want to look into and get back to you about.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, yes, you're right. You're absolutely correct. But when it comes to why the person doesn't like you, I want to see if I can find if that's in there. Lily would more than likely. Oh, Layla, if you've got Christian astrology, see if Lily says anything in his 12th house section.
I'll take a look.
Yeah, it's basically what you just, okay. Oops, sorry. All right, so wait, let me come back to Natalie. Natalie's, oh, she's got, oh, okay. So Natalie's got Venus on, oh, right, okay. Natalie's got Venus on the cusp of the 12th. So once again, so it's going to be similar to what we said with Christopher, except Venus in Aries, I call Amazon Venus. And so part of the problem in relationships, especially intimate relationships, is going to be, part of the self-undoing is who gets to be on top. Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot that I'm not sharing the screen. So this person, it probably is, when we get into the deeper intimate relationships, might naturally take charge, which might create resentment in the other partner. There could be a vying or a competition in the relationship for who wears the pants, or who is, or who's top dog in the relationship. So I would say part of the problem, look at how the Mars is in Leo. So the rager, I call Mars in Leo rager. So this could, not mind you, this is not necessarily, this could be a person who drinks alone, by the way, because of the Venus in the 12th. So this could be a person who likes to party by themselves and do their things to themselves. Notice though also that the ruler of the 6th, Venus rules the 6th and the 12th. So there could be also, there could be also a self-undoing in which you don't communicate when you're not feeling well, that you don't communicate that you're not feeling well when you don't feel well, with the ruler of the 6th and the 12th. So remember, so we haven't really talked about when a ruler of a planet is in a house or something like that, but that's an issue. But, oh, and notice that it's Venus is the ruler of the ascendant. So in this particular case specifically, what I would actually say is, and definitely needing to be in charge, needing to be in charge, needing to be recognized for what it is that I do, for whatever it is that I do, can also lead to self-undoing, and rage and anger can also lead to self-undoing. But Venus but the ruler of the 1st and the 12th, once again, in my opinion, says the person enjoys the isolation. This person enjoys doing things in isolation. And believe it or not, that could be a part of the problem in intimate relationships, is that this person needs so much time to themselves, needs to go into their own little exile, and the other partner might not understand. Well, wait, what? I thought we were going to do this kind of thing together. No, I really need my downtime right now. Well, wait, but wait, are we together or what? It's like, well, you know what? We're not going to be together if I can't have my time to myself, and because this person isn't going to break down isn't going to back down in an argument, right? Look at how the Venus is separating from the trine to the Mars. So there's all kinds of heated conversations going on, and mostly they'll have to do with my alone time, who's in charge, how do we come to an agreement, how do we compromise? It's okay for me to be vulnerable. This chart needs vulnerability. This chart needs to be able to be vulnerable. This chart has difficulty with vulnerability. So this chart needs to be able to do that. Let's find Olivia.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Oh, you've got that sun in there. Oh, no, Jupiter. Oh, that's right. It wasn't that. It was something else we were talking about with the sun. Oh, look, it's Jupiter. So once again, when we've talked about Jupiter in the 12th, what I tend to experience is that either there can be an inflation, a sense of self-inflation, there can be, right, because Jupiter makes things larger. There can be a making mountains out of molehills. There can be a turning small things into big things, right? There can be a unfounded optimism. There can also be a not seeing how much goes into what it is I have to do. So with Jupiter is so optimistic that it can believe, oh yeah, I can do that. And then we get into it, and then all of a sudden we realize that we can't, that it was way more than I expected. What is this? With the Lord in the 12th be in the 4th, 8th, or with the Lord thereof judge him sickly. Oh, this is what you're saying about, thank you. Okay, so this is the state of a secret enemy as opposed to the cause of why. So it's still kind of connected to who the enemy is, etc. We'll come back to that in a second. So with Jupiter in here, also Jupiter is about belief and how we adhere to belief. So it's different in Saturn, which is the beliefs we construct, right? Which is like what Diana used the best term, mental construction, right? A belief as mental construction. With Jupiter, it's this faith that I have. And so the faith can be ill-founded. Now, Jupiter rules what? He rules the second house, so money is a problem in this chart. And then he rules the 5th house. So the things that I like to do by myself. I like to do in isolation. I like to do, so this person, and also the Jupiter and Libra, we know that Olivia is an artist. So what really gives this person pleasure is going off into their little space, into their little isolated space and creating art. So that makes sense. But as far as Jupiter as a self-undoing, it's too much optimism. Or like I said, it can be magnifying things that aren't that important. Or it can be minimizing them because we're too optimistic, right? So it's about how big is it, or how much does it multiply? Or it can be making more of things that don't need to be made, right? Because we're just using all of the ideas of what Jupiter actually represents. But this chart has money problems. And we can see that with the Neptune in the 2nd and with the Jupiter, the ruler of the 2nd and the 12th. But and the Jupiter in the 12th. Okay, Olivia, or any of that correct?
I guess to an extent, but I also think it's a lot more considering 6 houses are ruled by my 12th house. It's just a lot.
I didn't even see this. I didn't even see this Venus, that it's Venus and Saturn and Jupiter. I was just looking at Jupiter. It is a lot. It's much more. Actually, so there's an issue when we've got Jupiter and Saturn in the same house or the same place or in connection to each other. Then, so I was really just looking at the Jupiter. I didn't really look to see how close the Venus and the Saturn are. Then what we've got going on is optimism versus pessimism. Yes, you can. No, I can't. Oh, that's a great idea. No, it's a terrible idea. Oh, I wouldn't. No, you shouldn't do that. So that would be part of the thing also is, or it's I mean, who's the ruler of the 7th? You might have had parents that were inhibiting, and so you may still hear their voice when you try to do things. So you may have some kind of although didn't you say your father was also an artist? Oh wait, no, it's Diana whose father was an artist.
My father played the trumpet.
Oh, your father was a musician. Okay, that makes perfect sense because the Jupiter. So it probably wouldn't be him. It could more than likely be the mother instead because the sun's in Virgo. So she could have been a little bit critical. But what I say here is that there might be a struggle in the creative process because the Venus is the creative process. Jupiter is the ruler of the 5th, which is our creativity. Libra is an aesthetic sign and Venus's sign. And Saturn, even though he's exalted, he'll slow it down. He will, so you might find that being able to get the work out is difficult, or that there's a very specific kind of slow step-by-step process you have to do, or that even that there's interruptions, that you might be able to get to a certain point and then things stop, and things might stop for a month or 2 months, and then you have to go, then you go back. So you may have, so Saturn might show itself in that respect. Certainly with the Venus and the Saturn, there could be problems, and with the 12th house, there could be problems in the love life too. You know, because Venus is the ruler of the 7th, she's also the ruler of the 12th. One of the things that we've noticed with Venus in the 12th is that relationships that don't see the light of day, right? So relationships.
But
what?
What I found the most interesting this lesson was that Venus is a co-significator for the 12th house. So I wonder how that plays out here then.
I think, I don't really, see, I think once again that it plays out as ruler of Pisces, as exaltation ruler of Pisces. And so I think that's really what he's talking about. But the thing about it is, for Venus to be a co-ruler of the 12th, wouldn't it need to have some, wouldn't the 12th itself need to have some of her significations, right? Nothing that we read, even though we saw that, nothing that we read, and notice that we only saw it after the 16th century, right? We didn't see Venus as co-significator of the 12th in any of the Greeks. We didn't see her as significator of the 12th in any of the Islamics or Benadi. What we saw was only Schörner, who is 16th century, and Lilly, who is 17th century. And from what I understand, the zodiac alphabet started being used more and more in the 15th century. So that by that time, when you're thinking, oh, Venus, she's the exaltation ruler of Pisces, make her as co-significator. It makes perfect sense. But none of the significations as far as Western astrology are concerned involve her. None of them, right? There's nothing about beauty. There's nothing about love. There's nothing about pleasure. There's nothing about happiness or mirth or humor. Nothing. None of that stuff is 12. So remember how when we saw the compound on mutants, the guy crossed out the Venus. He thought that doesn't make any sense at all. And on some level, he's right. It doesn't make any sense at all. What we could say is if we do want to think of this as a co-significator or Venus of a co-significator of the 12th, it could be a co-significator of what we do in private. Right? So a co-significator of the things that we do in private. And those things those are just those things, right? Those are the things that we do in private. And Venus obviously relates, because remember, where is Venus's, what's her milieu? Where's her arena?
The 5th house.
No, but as a place in a house, or a place somewhere.
Oh, the bedroom.
The
Bedroom.
The bedroom, right? So as a place in the house, Venus's milieu is the bedroom, which means that that's the place where that's behind closed. There used to be a song in the 70s, when we get behind closed doors and she lets her hair fall down, right? So behind closed doors, so we can maybe see that. So in this particular case, what we would see is that maybe all of the creative process happens where no one can see it. Secret sex, right? Also same thing. 12th is addiction, substances. Oh, addictions and substances. Now, Venus is connected with addictions and substances, with intoxicants and intoxication. Yes. So that could be a point. That could definitely be something. But we don't, so not specifically, but sure. I mean, it makes perfect sense that the 12th house self-undoing would be an addiction. Absolutely. Makes perfect sense. Relationships in general are troublesome. What about money, Olivia? That should be as well. Used to be. Okay, so she did have some issues around that. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share. And let's see, starting with Diana, what did we get out of today? What do you feel going on for today?
It was really interesting looking back at all the incarcerated people and comparing things about the 12th house. Not necessarily the moon, but there were a lot of other things that you put together in the charts.
Yeah, that was interesting. All right.
And of course, always, looking at my own self-undoing.
I mean, that's the main reason to be working with it. I mean, really, we talked about working with planets and all of that other stuff, and For those of you who are interested in maybe working with astrological magic, and Diana, I wanted to teach you something, by the way. I'll teach all of you this, by the way. Two things I wanted to teach, and I'm going to turn off the recording for you.